When the call first came from the school that morning, I honestly thought it was going to be the usual routine. A teacher saying my daughter forgot her homework, or maybe that she'd gotten into a little spat with one of her classmates. I had no idea I was about to walk into one of the strangest, funniest, and most unforgettable days of my life as a mom. The principal's voice on the phone had been unusually sharp, like he was trying very hard not to yell, but couldn't hide his frustration. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, "I need you to come to the office immediately. It's about your daughter." Those words always make a mother's stomach drop, no matter what. I remember grabbing my keys, shoving on my sneakers, and hurrying out the door without even finishing my coffee. My mind ran through 1,000 scenarios on the drive. Did she get into a fight? Did she skip class? Did she break something expensive? But nothing prepared me for what I was about to hear when I stepped into that office. The principal was waiting for me, red in the face, arms folded tight across his chest like he was trying to physically hold in his anger. He gestured for me to sit down. I did, clutching my purse like a shield. He didn't waste a second. "Do you know what your daughter did this morning?" he demanded, his voice carrying the kind of authority usually reserved for military generals. My heart pounded as I braced myself for the worst, but then he explained. "She snuck onto school property before the buses arrived," he said, his voice dripping with accusation, "and she swapped all the bus route signs." For a moment, I just blinked at him. My brain couldn't even process the words. "She did." "What?" the principal went on, his voice growing louder with each sentence. "The cheerleaders ended up on the chess club's field trip. The football team got dropped off at the art museum. And the debate team," he practically shouted, "arrived at the basketball tournament." He threw his hands up like the sky was falling. "Do you realize the chaos this caused?" I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from laughing. Because while he was fuming, all I could picture were those groups of kids, so used to staying in their own little bubbles, being completely flipped upside down. I imagined cheerleaders staring at chessboards in horror, football players looking around an art gallery with confusion, and debate kids wandering into a loud sports arena with wide eyes. The image was so ridiculous, I almost snorted out loud. But I couldn't let the principal see that. I tried to keep my face serious, nodding like I understood his outrage, but inside I was thinking, "Oh my God, that's actually brilliant." He wasn't done. "She disrupted the entire day," he continued, his voice trembling with anger. "Do you know how many phone calls I've already had to field from teachers, from bus drivers, from chaperones? This is unacceptable, completely irresponsible." He leaned forward, staring me down. "What do you have to say for your daughter's behavior?" That was the moment I realized I had to tread very carefully. Because while he expected me to scold her, ground her, and apologize profusely, I couldn't shake this bubbling sense of pride rising inside me. My daughter, my 14-year-old, had managed to pull off something so daring, so perfectly executed and so clever that it had thrown the whole school into chaos. Not because she wanted to hurt anyone, but because she was making a statement. And deep down, I respected that. As he lectured me, my mind drifted back to the kind of girl my daughter had always been. From the time she was little, she never fit neatly into one category. She wasn't just a sports kid or a theater kid or a nerd. She dipped her toes in everything. One week she was sketching comic strips, the next she was reading philosophy books way too advanced for her age, and then she'd surprise me by joining a soccer scrimmage in the park. But because she didn't commit herself to one label, the kids at school often didn't know where to place her. And in a place where cliques ruled everything, that meant she often floated in between, unnoticed. I think she hated the way kids were divided up like that, boxed in, expected to only hang out with people just like them. She used to complain at dinner, "Why can't people just mix? Why does everyone act like we're enemies just because we're in different clubs?" I should have known her frustration would eventually boil over into some kind of stunt. The principal kept going, but I stopped really listening. My thoughts shifted to that morning. She'd left the house earlier than usual, saying she had to grab something from her locker. I didn't question it, because she always had some new project going on. I figured she wanted extra time before homeroom. I had no idea she was sneaking around the bus lot, pulling off a scheme that would throw the entire school day into madness. It was almost impressive how carefully she must have planned it. Sneaking onto school property undetected, swapping signs, without the drivers noticing, making sure each bus still looked legitimate until it was too late. That wasn't just mischief, that was strategy. Finally, the principal snapped me out of my thoughts. "Mrs. Johnson," he said sharply, "I need your assurance that you will punish your daughter appropriately. She must understand that actions like this will not be tolerated." I nodded slowly, trying to keep my expression neutral. Inside, though, I was struggling. Punish her? For what? Being creative? For challenging the system in a way that actually forced kids out of their bubbles? Of course, I couldn't say that to him. So I told him I'd talk to her at home. He seemed satisfied enough with that, though his glare lingered as if he doubted me. He dismissed me, but before I left, he added, "And for the record, if anything, like this happens again, suspension will be the least of her worries." Walking back to my car, I felt like I was carrying two completely opposite emotions inside me. On the one hand, I was supposed to be the responsible parent, the one who made sure my daughter learned right from wrong. On the other hand, I couldn't stop smiling to myself. I even laughed out loud once I was in the parking lot out of earshot, because honestly, my daughter had done something I wish more kids had the guts to do. She'd shaken things up. She'd taken a school that prided itself on order and structure and turned it upside down in the most harmless yet impactful way. Nobody got hurt. Nobody was bullied. But for once, every kid got to see what life was like outside their little circles. And I couldn't help but admire her for it. When I finally saw her later that day, she was waiting for me at home, sitting on the couch like a soldier awaiting her trial. She looked up at me nervously, her big brown eyes searching for clues in my face. "Am I in huge trouble?" she asked quietly. I set down my bag, crossed my arms, and tried to put on my best serious mom expression. "That depends," I said, drawing it out. She squirmed, biting her lip. "Okay, so maybe it was a little crazy," she admitted, "but I had a reason." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, really? I'd love to hear it." And that's when she surprised me even more. "Mom," she said, sitting up straighter, "every day they tell us to work together, to adapt, to think outside the box. But then they separate us into these cliques and act like it's normal. Nobody ever talks to anyone outside their group. It's stupid." Her voice trembled, but her passion was clear. "So I thought, what if we mixed it all up? What if people had to actually experience being in someone else's world for a day?" She looked down at her hands. "I know it caused chaos, but for once, people were laughing together. Did you hear what happened? The football players actually loved the art museum. The chess kids had fun watching basketball. Even the debate team got along with the cheerleaders. Everyone was forced to mix, and it worked. People had fun." She looked back up at me, eyes shining with something I could only describe as conviction. That's what I wanted. That's why I did it. I stood there, stunned. This wasn't just a prank. This was my 14-year-old staging a full-blown social experiment. And she had a point. The principal had been too angry to see it, but I couldn't deny the truth in her words. She had exposed the ridiculous way the school divided kids, and she'd done it in a way that made people laugh, not cry. My heart swelled with pride. Of course, I couldn't let her completely off the hook. Not yet. I told her we'd need to talk more about consequences, about responsibility. But inside, I knew something important had happened that day. My daughter had proven she wasn't just smart, she was bold. And I had a feeling this was only the beginning. The next morning, I half expected to wake up to more angry phone calls from the school, or maybe even a notice that my daughter had been suspended on the spot. But the phone stayed quiet. Still, the tension in our house was thick. Over breakfast, she sat across from me, stirring her cereal absent-mindedly, clearly waiting for me to lay down the punishment hammer. I watched her for a long moment, wondering how best to handle this. Part of me wanted to ground her just so she'd learn the official lesson. But the bigger part of me, the mom who had always admired her independent spirit, knew that punishing her harshly might crush something really important inside her. So instead of yelling, I finally leaned back in my chair and said, "You know, kiddo, what you pulled off yesterday was something else." Her spoon clattered against the bowl as she looked up, startled. "Something else like bad?" she asked cautiously. I shook my head. "Something else like impressive." Her eyes widened. She didn't know how to react to that. "Wait, you're not mad?" she asked, tilting her head as if she thought I was playing some kind of trick. I smiled a little. "Oh, don't get me wrong. I should be mad. The principal practically wanted to strangle me. And technically, what you did was against the rules. But..." I paused, searching for the right words. "But I can't ignore the fact that you made a point. And honestly, you might have made it better than the teachers ever could." She blinked at me, processing my words. Slowly, a small grin spread across her face. The truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about what she'd said the day before. The way she described cliques and divisions, and how kids rarely mixed with people outside their little circle. I'd been in high school once too, and I remembered how suffocating that culture was. The labels, the stereotypes, the constant pressure to belong somewhere. And I also remembered how lonely it felt if you didn't fit neatly into any one box. Maybe that was part of why her prank hit me so hard. She wasn't just trying to stir up trouble. She was highlighting something that had been broken for years. And as her mom, I couldn't help but feel proud of that kind of insight. That afternoon, when she came home from school, I asked her how the day went. She shrugged, dropping her backpack by the door. Everyone kept whispering about it. Some people were mad at me, but a lot of kids were actually laughing about it. Like the football guys kept saying how cool the art museum was, and one of the chess kids told me he actually wants to try out for basketball now. It was weird, but good weird. She glanced up at me, unsure if she should keep going. The principal glared at me every time he passed me in the hallway, though. That made me chuckle. I'm not surprised. He probably spent the entire day putting out fires. But you know what? Sometimes grown-ups forget that kids can teach us things too. She tilted her head, curiosity lighting up her face. "You really think so?" I nodded. "I do. And I think yesterday proved it." Over the next few days, I noticed something changing around her. For the first time in a long time, she was actually being noticed at school, but not in the way I feared. Kids from all sorts of groups started talking to her, some out of curiosity, some out of admiration. She told me one night, laughing, "Mom, a cheerleader actually sat with me at lunch today. She said she thought what I did was hilarious." Then another night she told me that one of the debate kids invited her to join their after-school practice, just to shake things up. I could see her confidence growing, her world widening in ways she hadn't experienced before. And deep down, I knew this was the kind of breakthrough she had been craving for years. But of course, not everyone was happy. One evening, the phone rang again. It was the principal. The moment I answered, his tone was sharp. "Mrs. Johnson, I am calling because it seems your daughter's little stunt has started a trend. Kids are now joking about swapping other things. There's been talk of trading lunch tables, even switching locker decorations. It's spreading." His voice was full of exasperation, but I could almost hear the panic underneath. "This kind of behavior is disruptive. It undermines order." I bit my lip, trying not to smile. Or maybe, I said carefully, it's helping them connect with people they normally wouldn't. Silence. Then he huffed. Mrs. Johnson, if you continue to encourage this, I'm afraid we'll have to consider more serious action. I thanked him for the call, hung up, and sat at the kitchen table. For a long moment, shaking my head. The man was so rigid, so determined to maintain his neat little boxes, that he couldn't see the bigger picture even if it danced in front of him. Later, I told my daughter about the call. She rolled her eyes. Of course he hates it. He's obsessed with control. I raised a finger. Careful. He is still the principal, and you do need to be respectful. But between you and me, I think you've gotten under his skin, and he doesn't know how to handle it. She smirked, a spark of mischief lighting her face. Good. Maybe that means it worked. I sighed, half exasperated, half proud. Just don't push it too far, okay? One revolution at a time. She giggled, but I knew her mind was already buzzing with ideas. That night, I sat in bed thinking about what it meant to raise a child like her. She wasn't afraid to question things, to poke at the rules, to expose the cracks in systems that adults often just accept. Part of me worried about where that boldness might take her. Would she get in trouble one day for going too far? Would people misunderstand her intentions? But another part of me knew that spirit was exactly what the world needed more of. I thought, back to when I was her age. I'd been timid, desperate to fit in, always afraid to make waves. And sometimes I regretted that. I admired my daughter because she refused to be invisible. She refused to sit quietly when she saw something unfair or ridiculous. And even though it scared me, I loved her for it. The following week, things escalated. One afternoon, she burst through the front door, her face flushed with excitement. "Mom, you're not going to believe this," she exclaimed, tossing her backpack onto the floor. I set down the dish I was washing and turned to her. "What happened?" She grinned. "They're starting a new program at school. Like officially. They're calling it Mix It Up Fridays. Every Friday, kids have to sit with someone new at lunch or join a different group activity. They said it's about building community." My jaw dropped. "Wait, you mean—" She nodded furiously, her hair bouncing. "Yes, they're literally making it a thing now, because of what I did." I laughed in disbelief. "You mean to tell me your little bus prank has now turned into a school-wide policy?" She nodded again, beaming. "Isn't that crazy?" The principal announced it over the intercom. He didn't say it was my idea, but everyone knows. People were clapping. Even teachers looked excited. She flopped onto the couch, grinning from ear to ear. "Mom, I think I actually changed something." I walked over, knelt in front of her, and held her hands. "Sweetheart, do you realize how huge that is? You made a difference. You actually changed your school for the better." Tears stung my eyes, because at that moment I realized she was stepping into something bigger than just a silly prank. She was becoming the kind of person who could challenge the world and maybe even reshape it. That night, after she went to bed, I sat alone in the quiet living room, replaying everything in my mind. The principal had called it chaos. The teachers had groaned about disruptions. But in the end, the kids, the very people who mattered most, were happier. They were connecting. They were laughing with kids they used to ignore. And it had all started with my daughter sneaking out early one morning and swapping a few bus signs. I leaned back on the couch, smiling to myself. Some people saw her as a troublemaker, but I saw her for what she really was, a trailblazer. And as much as I wanted to protect her from consequences, I also knew this was just the beginning of her journey. Because kids like her, they don't stop at one prank. They grow into adults who question systems, who push boundaries, who create change. And while that thought terrified me as a mother, it also filled me with hope. The weeks after Mix It Up Fridays began felt almost surreal. Every Friday, my daughter would come home brimming with stories about how the cafeteria buzzed with new energy. She told me about how the shy kid from her math class ended up bonding with one of the football players over their shared love of video games, and how a cheerleader discovered she actually had a talent for debating when she sat with the speech team. At first, I couldn't believe the school had actually embraced something so simple, yet so powerful. But as the stories kept coming, it became clear that the walls really were coming down. It wasn't perfect, of course. There were still kids who resisted, who crossed their arms and scowled their way through forced interactions. But even then, seeds were being planted. People were seeing each other differently. And I couldn't help but marvel that it had all started because my daughter dared to bend the rules. One night at dinner, I asked her how she felt about everything. She twirled her fork in her pasta, thinking carefully before she spoke. Honestly, it feels good, but also weird. I raised an eyebrow. Weird how? She shrugged, looking thoughtful. It's like people are treating me differently. Some kids keep coming up to me like I'm some kind of hero, and others, they're mad. They say I only made things harder, or that I'm just trying to get attention. It's a lot. She stabbed a noodle, sighing. Sometimes I just want to be normal again. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Sweetheart, normal is overrated. You had the courage to do something bold, and not everyone will understand that. But you've started a conversation that needed to happen. That's not just about you. That's about everyone. She gave me a half smile, but I could see the conflict in her eyes. The truth is, her struggle reminded me of something I had gone through as a teenager, though in a very different way. I wasn't brave like her. I had ideas, yes, but I rarely voiced them. When I was her age, I wrote essays for myself, filling journals with thoughts about how unfair things felt, how kids who didn't fit into neat categories were always pushed aside. But those essays never saw the light of day. They stayed locked in my drawer, hidden from the world. Sometimes, when I saw my daughter standing up straight and unafraid to stir the pot, I wondered if maybe she was living the life I had been too, scared to pursue. And maybe that's why I felt such pride. It was like watching a part of me finally break free through her. But as proud as I was, I also knew the world could be cruel, and the backlash didn't take long to escalate. A week later, I received another call from the principal. His tone was sharp as ever. Mrs. Johnson, we've had some incidents. It seems that not all students appreciate the Mix It Up program. There's been resistance. Arguments have broken out in the cafeteria. I gripped the phone tighter. And how exactly is that my daughter's fault? I asked, my voice firmer than I expected. He cleared his throat. I'm not saying it's her fault, per se. But her actions sparked this entire thing, and it's causing disorder. We can't have that. I pinched the bridge of my nose, exhaling slowly. So what's the alternative? Go back to everyone ignoring each other? Pretending those divisions don't exist? There was a long pause on his end. Finally, he muttered, "This is a school, Mrs. Johnson. We need structure, not chaos." And with that, he hung up. I sat there in the kitchen, staring at the silent phone in my hand, anger simmering inside me. He just didn't get it. He couldn't see beyond his rules and routines. But I also knew that my daughter was in the middle of a storm she didn't fully understand. At 14, she was still just a kid. She had sparked something powerful, but she wasn't equipped to deal with all the consequences. That was where I came in. Not to fix everything for her, but to help her navigate the messy reality of what change really looks like. That night, we had a long talk. She was curled up on the couch with her knees tucked to her chest, looking smaller than usual. Mom, some kids are saying I ruined everything, like that I'm making them uncomfortable. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Her voice cracked a little, and my heart clenched. I wrapped an arm around her and pulled her close. Sweetheart, listen to me. Change is uncomfortable. Always. People resist it because it forces them to face things they'd rather avoid. That doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you're shaking things up. And sometimes that's exactly what's needed. She sniffled, wiping her eyes. But what if it gets worse? I kissed the top of her head. Then we deal with it. Together. You're not alone in this. Over the next few weeks, things settled into a strange rhythm. Some kids still complained, but more and more began to embrace the new program. Teachers started reporting that kids were working better in mixed groups, that participation in class was improving, and even that bullying incidents had slightly decreased. It wasn't a miracle cure, but it was progress. And deep down, I knew my daughter had sparked something bigger than just a few bus sign switches. She had planted an idea that maybe the world didn't have to stay divided forever. Then came the school board meeting. I'll never forget that night. Parents gathered in the gym, folding chairs lined up in neat rows, the smell of sweat and pencil shavings lingering in the air. The principal stood at the podium, stiff as ever, trying to explain why the Mix-It-Up Fridays had been implemented. Some parents grumbled, others nodded. Then, to my surprise, he said, "This program was inspired by a disruptive event, but it has shown some unexpected positive outcomes." My eyes widened. He wasn't giving my daughter credit outright, but he was admitting, publicly, that it had worked. When the floor opened for comments, parents began standing up. One mother said her son had made a new friend in another grade. A father shared how his daughter had discovered a love for art after being paired with kids from the art club. Story after story poured out, and I felt tears prick my eyes. Then, of course, there were the dissenters. One man shouted that he didn't send his kid to school to be part of social experiments. Another woman argued that forced interactions would never solve real issues. I clenched my fists in my lap, fighting back the urge to stand up and shout them down. But then, something incredible happened. My daughter, my shy, introverted, sometimes rebellious 14-year-old, stood up from her chair. Her voice trembled, at first, but then it grew stronger. "I just want to say, I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just wanted people to see each other differently. I thought if we got out of our groups for a day, maybe we'd find things in common we didn't. No, we're there. And it worked. At least for me it did. I made new friends. And I think a lot of other people did too." The gym fell silent. Even the angry parents quieted down. And in that moment, I don't think I'd ever been prouder. She wasn't hiding behind me. She wasn't shrinking from the spotlight. She was standing up unapologetically for what she believed in. After the meeting, as we walked to the car, I slipped my arm around her shoulders. "You were amazing in there," I whispered. She smiled, her cheeks flushed. I was so scared. My hands were shaking the whole time. I laughed softly. "That's how you know it matters. If you weren't nervous, it wouldn't mean anything." She leaned against me as we walked, and for the first time, I could see the beginning of a young woman emerging from the little girl I used to tuck in at night. Bold, brave, ready to take on the world. And though I didn't say it out loud, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was only the beginning of her story. Life after that school board meeting took on a new shape, almost like the world was shifting under our feet in ways neither of us had expected. For the first time in months, my daughter walked into school without shrinking into herself or keeping her eyes glued to the ground. She wasn't hiding anymore. In fact, she was glowing in a way I hadn't seen since she was little, like she finally felt seen, and not just by me. Other kids began stopping her in the hallways, sometimes to thank her, sometimes to challenge her, but either way they were engaging with her. She wasn't invisible. She was a force. That didn't mean things were perfect. Some students still whispered, still rolled their eyes, still muttered that she was too much. But for every one of those, There were two more who leaned in to listen when she spoke, who gave her a smile, who invited her to sit with them at lunch. And I knew that mattered more than anything. At home, things were shifting too. She would come home with stories that made me laugh until tears ran down my cheeks. Like the time a jock had ended up sketching with the art kids and discovered he had a knack for drawing caricatures. Or the time the science club and the drama kids had combined forces to create a stage set that looked like a laboratory explosion, complete with smoke effects. Each story was a reminder that the walls were crumbling, that kids who never would have crossed paths were now learning from each other. And every time she told one of these stories, I felt my pride in her deepen. It wasn't just about her prank anymore. It was about the ripple effect she had caused, how her small act of rebellion was rewriting the social code of the entire school. But along with the pride came something else: fear. I knew how institutions worked. I knew how people in power didn't like being challenged, even when the challenge was harmless, or, in this case, beneficial. The principal may have been forced to acknowledge the program's success, but I could still see the tension in his jaw every time we crossed paths. He wasn't happy about it, and unhappy people in authority often find ways to make trouble. That's why I wasn't entirely surprised when one Thursday evening an envelope arrived in the mail addressed to me in cold official lettering. Inside was a letter from the district superintendent. They were reviewing the school's experimental practices, and as the parent of the student who had initiated the disruption, I was being invited to a meeting to discuss potential disciplinary actions. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with that letter in my hands, my stomach twisting in knots. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about us. They wanted to make an example of her, and by extension, me. And for the first time since this all began, I felt the weight of fear press down on my chest. But when my daughter walked into the room and saw the look on my face, she didn't flinch. She read the letter, set it down, and simply said, "So, what? We'll go. They can't scare us." Her voice was steady, defiant, stronger than mine at that moment. And in that instant, I realized the roles had reversed. I wasn't just protecting her anymore. She was teaching me how to stand tall. The meeting was set for the following week. We walked into the district office together, our heads high, but my palms were sweating. The room was sterile, with white walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. Across the table sat the superintendent, a few board members, and, of course, the principal, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. They began by listing all the infractions my daughter had committed: trespassing on school property, tampering with bus signs, creating chaos. Their voices were cold, detached, as if they were reading off a grocery list. Then they turned to me, asking if I had anything to say in defense. I looked at my daughter. Her eyes were wide but not afraid, waiting for me. So I took a deep breath and spoke. Yes, my daughter switched bus signs. Yes, it was against the rules. But let's not pretend the story ends there. Her actions led to a program that has reduced bullying, increased collaboration, and built friendships across divides. Isn't that what education is supposed to be about? Not just memorizing facts, but learning how to live together? I could see a flicker of doubt cross one board member's face, but the superintendent remained stone-faced. Then my daughter spoke up. Her voice was calm, but it carried across the room with surprising strength. I know I broke the rules. I know what I did was risky, but sometimes the only way to change things is to break the rules that don't make sense anymore. I didn't do it to cause chaos. I did it because I wanted people to stop pretending we're all so different when we're not. And it worked. You can punish me if you want, but you can't unsee what's happening at school now. People are different, and that's worth more than a detention or a suspension. Silence filled the room. The principal's jaw clenched, his face flushed with frustration. But the superintendent leaned back in her chair, studying my daughter carefully. Finally, she said, You may not realize it yet, but you've tapped into something educators have been trying to achieve for years. That doesn't excuse your actions, but it does force us to consider the results. And with that, she adjourned the meeting. No punishment, no suspension, just a warning, and a reminder that change always comes at a cost. Walking out of that building, my daughter looked up at me and grinned. We won, didn't we? I laughed, relief flooding through me. For now, I said, but don't think this is the end of it. She nodded knowingly. I don't want it to be. And it wasn't. Over the next few months, the Mix It Up program became a permanent fixture, not just at her school, but at others in the district. Word spread quickly, and soon educators from neighboring towns were asking about it, curious how something so simple could spark such transformation. I watched my daughter beam as she was asked to speak at a youth leadership event, sharing her story with kids from across the state. She stood on that stage, her voice steady, her presence commanding, and I thought to myself, this is only the beginning. But with new recognition came new challenges. Attention can be a double-edged sword, especially for a teenager. There were days she loved the spotlight, and days she crumbled under its weight. There were whispers that she was a teacher's pet, accusations that she was only chasing fame. And there were nights when she came into my room, curled up on my bed, and whispered that she wished it would all go away. Each time, I held her close and reminded her that it was okay to feel overwhelmed, that bravery doesn't mean never being afraid. It means moving forward even when you are. And through it all, one thought kept repeating in my mind. If she could do all this at 14, what would she be capable of as she grew older? The world had no idea what was coming. And frankly, neither did I. But one thing was certain. Whatever it was, I would be there, standing right beside her, proud as ever. Looking back now, it's hard to believe that one mischievous morning, one decision my daughter made before the sun even rose, could change the course of not just her school but our lives. It all started with bus signs and a principal's outrage, but by the time we reached this point, she had become something far greater than the girl people once overlooked. She was becoming a leader, and as her mom, I got a front row seat to watching her grow into herself. The weeks after the superintendent's meeting were like living in two worlds at once. At home, things felt almost normal again. We still argued over dirty dishes and forgotten homework, still laughed late at night while watching old sitcom reruns, still had mornings where she would slam the door because I asked her to wear a jacket. But at school, and in the community, her reputation had shifted. Parents were talking about her. Teachers were treating her with a mix of caution and admiration. And the kids were looking at her differently. Some with envy, some with respect, some with confusion. But nobody was ignoring her anymore. One Saturday morning, I found her sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by scraps of paper, notebooks, and markers. She was sketching out what looked like a plan, complete with arrows, circles, and color-coded boxes. "What's all this?" I asked, pouring myself some coffee. She looked up, her eyes bright with excitement. "I'm mapping out senior prank." "Weak," she said, grinning. My stomach dropped. "Oh no, absolutely not. Haven't we been through enough?" She laughed, shaking her head. "Relax, Mom. It's not what you think. I don't want to cause chaos anymore. I want to inspire people. Make it fun, but also meaningful." That's when she explained her idea. Instead of silly pranks or stunts designed to embarrass people, she wanted to organize a massive role swap day. Teachers would trade classes, athletes would try theater kids would take gym, and the quietest students would be given the microphone at assemblies. She wanted to flip the script on every stereotype, every boundary, every box people got shoved into. "It's about making people see each other differently," she said. "Like the bus prank, but bigger." I stared at her, both terrified and proud. It wasn't a prank at all. It was a vision. But I also knew what she was up against. You realize the administration is going to fight this, right? I said gently. They already think you're too much. She shrugged, determination written across her face. Then let them fight. I'm not backing down this time. And she didn't. She went to the student council. She talked to teachers. She trusted. She even scheduled a meeting with the principal himself, walking into his office with a folder full of research about how schools that mixed groups saw lower bullying rates and higher student satisfaction. I wasn't there for that meeting, but when she came home afterward, she told me he had listened in silence, his face unreadable. At the end, he simply said, "I'll think about it." That might not sound like much, but coming from him, it was a crack in the wall. Weeks passed, and to my amazement, the school approved her idea, though reluctantly and only under strict supervision. She poured herself into the planning, staying up late, making lists, calling friends. And when the day finally came, it was nothing short of extraordinary. Walking through those halls felt like stepping into an alternate universe. Teachers were laughing as they stumbled through gym drills. Star athletes were nervously reciting lines on stage. Shy kids were leading discussions in history class with a confidence nobody had ever seen before. The whole building buzzed with energy, like the air itself was alive with possibility. I'll never forget the look on her face that day. She stood in the middle of the cafeteria at lunchtime, watching as kids who used to sit in tight cliques were mixing together, trading stories, laughing. For once, the labels didn't matter, and she turned to me, because yes, I had snuck in to see it all, and whispered, "This is what I wanted. This is what school should feel like." My heart swelled so much in that moment, I thought it might burst. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. There were still a few parents who called the school to complain, saying their kids didn't learn anything real that day. A handful of teachers grumbled about wasted time, and the principal, though unable to deny the success, still carried that familiar scowl. But the superintendent visited the school herself later that week, and when she saw the smiles, the laughter, the new friendships, she pulled my daughter aside and told her she had sparked something important. I could see my daughter trying to play it cool, but her cheeks turned pink with pride. At home that night, she sat across from me at the table, quieter than usual. Finally, she said, "Mom, do you think this means I could actually make a difference when I grow up? Like, for real?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "You already are," I said softly. "But if you're asking if I think this is just the beginning, then yes, I do. And I meant it, because I could see it. Now, the fire in her, the way her mind worked, the way she wasn't afraid to challenge rules when they no longer served people. She had the heart of a leader, the stubbornness of a change-maker, and the courage of someone who knew her worth. She wasn't perfect. No teenager is. She still forgot to clean her room, still rolled her eyes when I reminded her about chores, still had moments of insecurity that left her in tears. But at her core, she was powerful, and I couldn't help but believe that the world would one day see what I saw. Months later, as the school year wound down, the roll swap day was declared the most successful event of the year. It became a tradition, something that would continue long after she graduated. Other schools began adopting the idea. And as for my daughter, she began to dream bigger. She started looking into colleges that valued student leadership, programs that focused on education reform, social change, even politics. The very institutions that once tried to silence her were now fueling her ambition. But for me, the proudest moment didn't come at a meeting or during an event. It came one quiet evening at home. We were sitting on the couch, the house dark except for the glow of the TV. She leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and whispered, "Mom, thank You for never making me feel wrong for being myself. Tears stung my eyes, because I knew how easily things could have gone differently. I could have scolded her after the bus prank, could have told her to keep her head down, could have pushed her to be smaller. But instead, I chose to stand by her, to let her voice grow louder. And now, here we were, stronger, closer, braver than ever. As I tucked her in that night, I thought back to the principal's words, the accusations, the anger. Reckless, he had called her. Irresponsible. Maybe, in a way, he was right. But what he couldn't see, what so many adults can't see, is that recklessness can sometimes be a spark. That irresponsibility can sometimes be courage. And that sometimes, the very traits that scare us in our children are the ones that will one day change the world. So yes, my daughter messed with the school buses. She broke the rules. She caused chaos. And I have
never been prouder. Not just because of what she did, but because of who she is becoming. A girl unafraid to question, unafraid to dream, unafraid to lead. My daughter, my pride, my hope for the future. And as I think about what lies ahead, college, adulthood, challenges we can't even imagine, I know one thing for sure. Whatever comes, she'll face it head on. And I'll be right there, cheering her on, proud as ever. Because in the end, it wasn't just about a prank or a program or even a school. It was about the courage to stand up, to be different, to break the walls that keep us apart. And she did that. She really did. And though the world might not fully understand it yet, I do. And I will never forget the day my daughter taught me, her mom, that sometimes the boldest, wildest, most reckless ideas are the ones that change everything.